So I play those at home because I lose everything. Oh, totally. I'm the worst. I've left my banjo. I almost left my laptop at breakfast this morning, and I left my banjo in Bloomington, Illinois once and didn't realize it till the next day. And I remember the owner of the club called me, and he goes, yeah, your banjo's here. And I was like, oh my God. Like I realized it when he told me, and he goes, what is wrong with you? I know.
Greetings, everybody. Keith Billick here with another episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. As promised, and as you're probably already noticing, I have taken to my suburban Detroit backyard podcast recording studio. I have a wonderful home, although the house itself is somewhat modest. I am incredibly lucky to have a great backyard, and I try to utilize the space that I have to its full extent, and that involves getting out here on these nice evenings and doing my recording out here. And I promise it isn't nearly as stormy as it sounds. I almost feel like I sound like Lieutenant Dan strapped to the top mast of the shrimp boat in the raging storm. But I promise it's actually a pretty nice night. But the wind has kicked up here. You'll hear a bit of that. You might hear some critters, and we're going to ignore them for now, hopefully. But either way, we're going to roll with it. I lugged all this recording equipment out to my backyard, and I'm not leaving until I get this thing done. I'm not going back inside now. I do have a quick announcement/update about the podcast. As you all know, we are in social distancing reality now, and as you also might know, or maybe can tell from the sound of it, I do almost all of these interviews in person, and I think that adds a lot in terms of the intimacy and the back and forth that's possible with the conversation that I have, and also just sound quality is really important to me, especially when they're playing banjo and you want to hear what they're talking about. So I've always been proud of the sound quality and just the quality of the overall conversation that I've been able to achieve. However, these days, meeting up with people in person is tough when everyone's tour dates are canceled. And I was really lucky to have a decent number of conversations already recorded before all this business started. So you're hearing a lot of those conversations come out now. However, I am getting short on replenishing the stock for future episodes. And with that in mind, and this is actually something that I've been kind of tossing around doing anyway, I've reached out to some of the past guests of the podcast and invited them just to participate in new segments about new banjo releases and new music that's coming out. So what I'm going to try here, and I actually don't know completely how this is going to turn out or what form it might take, but I'm going to be releasing several shorter episodes in the coming months or just indefinitely that will profile a specific banjo recording and probably a small talk with whoever the banjo player is that's releasing that. And the focus won't be as much on the sound quality and the conversation and the background of the person like you're used to, but it'll just be kind of a heads up for all you listeners of new music that you might want to check out, maybe picking the brain of what went into the project from the recording artist. And I thought that was a cool way to allow them to promote things when they're unable to do that via the normal means, which is touring and performing. So it allows them to do that. It allows me to create some new episodes even without needing to rise to that standard that I've set for myself. But I'm still going to make them sound as good as possible. But yeah, just a heads up that there's going to be some new types of episodes coming out. So yeah, that's the news. I hope to have one of those out here in the very near future. The other news, and this is not new news, but it still is very relevant news, is that this podcast is completely supported by listeners, and listeners support this podcast through the Patreon site, and that's patreon.com/banjopodcast. I really rely on the generous donations through that site. You can sign up to be a supporter for as little as $1 a month. Today's podcast has two featured supporters from the Patreon page. They are Austin Cole and Renee McIntosh. Usually I have a few tidbits of information about the Patreon supporters. I actually don't have much to go on with these two. However, just based on the fact that they are avid Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast listeners, we all know how incredibly good-looking and talented and wise they are with their financial decisions, with their podcast listening decisions. So wherever you are, Austin and Renee, I thank you so much for becoming Patreon supporters. And once again, for the rest of you, patreon.com/banjopodcast. The other ways to support the show, of course, are to spread the word amongst your friends, share the links on social media, follow me on social media. I'm Picky Fingers on Facebook. I am Picky_Fingers on Instagram, and at Banjo Podcast on Twitter. So track me down in all those places and make sure you keep in touch. The other way to keep in touch, of course, is to email me, and that's pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com.
I know you think you fell in love the first time that you kissed, but I can see what's coming, son. This isn't some plot twist. So pound the walls, scream and holler. That girl, she's got you by the collar. Spoiler alert, this one's gonna hurt. By the time she's done, you'll have lost your shirt. This is your spoiler alert.
Today's featured guest is Ben Wright of the Chicago-based bluegrass band, the Henhouse Prowlers. Ben is a fantastic banjo player, and him, along with his bandmates, would make just an incredible bluegrass band that any of us would love to see at any venue or festival. However, the thing that I'm the most excited for you to hear about, and just something that will be very obvious hearing me talk to him, how fascinated I am, the calling card of the Henhouse Prowlers is the musical and cultural outreach they do, and their travels have taken them to way too many countries to name, but they've done significant touring to Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, a lot of third world countries in which they are not only performing bluegrass to people who have likely never heard it before, but also collaborating with traditional musicians from whatever country they happen to be in, with some pretty fascinating results. And there's a lot on YouTube, way too much for me to list, but you'll hear about that from him and even some demonstrations for him, and I can't wait for you to hear it. They being the Henhouse Prowlers, have also established a nonprofit organization called the Bluegrass Ambassadors, which in a similar vein, their mission is to educate and perform outreach about traditional music, including bluegrass. So all good stuff, and it's not lost on me that this is all coming at a time where maybe we all need a reminder of how powerful music can be in terms of bridging divides and finding common ground with people who, in Ben's case, he's finding common ground with people who, as far as their life's background, couldn't be more different than he was, but they're collaborating. So, I find it inspiring in a lot of different ways, and I know you will too. So here it is. Enjoy the conversation with Ben Wright of the Henhouse Prowlers.
Originally from upstate New York, a little town called Homer.
Okay.
And but I grew up there and left, as most people try to do at some point in their life. I left my hometown to go to Chicago in 1999. October of 1999, I arrived in Chicago and realized pretty quickly I wanted to play an instrument, but didn't know what it was. And
so was this like an after high school thing that you took off?
Yeah, it was. I was 19 or 20.
Okay.
And I was smoking a lot of pot and not doing much with my life, and had an opportunity to move to Chicago. Actually, I wanted at that time to work with with homeless people. It was a youthful, optimistic thing. It was connected to the fact that my dad is an African historian, and he took me to Africa when I was 18, 17.
Oh, wow.
And it just whiplashed my reality settings.
Oh, I can imagine.
And I came back and
What countries?
just the Gambia. That's his specialty. He's written several books about it, nerdy, historical, university type books.
Oh, how interesting! Though.
And he had to go there to update one of his books, and brought me and my brother and a good friend of mine with him, and it definitely was a paradigm shift for me. And I came back wanting to do something that I felt had more impact, and I found a place in farther upstate from New York than when I was from that worked with homeless people, and I started volunteering there, and I lived there for a while, and somebody there was like, if you like doing this here, you should try it in the city. I know a place in Chicago that's looking for some help. So I just kind of packed all my stuff into a car with my girlfriend at the time, and we drove out to Chicago. But
you at least kind of had... You had at least a little bit of a plan in terms of having like a contact at this.
Totally.
Place.
Yeah, it was
cool.
I don't know how detailed I want to get it or should get into this, but there's a thing called the Catholic Worker Movement that's been around since the 1920s, started by a woman named Dorothy Day. And some people would say she was communist, but those houses still exist all over the country, and they're very much off the grid, no public federal funding for them. And there's one right in the middle of uptown Chicago. And I moved in there and lived there for free, and shared a room with various homeless guys that came through. For about 3 years I lived there, and it was an intense work. It's not something I could ever do again. It was community living, and they had served dinner 5 nights a week to anybody that would come to the door.
Right.
It was a powerful experience and foundational for me as a human being. And also, 3 months after I got there, I knew I wanted to play an instrument, and happened to be walking by the Old Town School of Folk Music, and they had a banjo in the window that was $199, and I had just gotten paid $200.
Yeah,
and
cool.
so I just it wasn't, there was no preconceived notion or anything about it. I actually had internally thought I didn't like bluegrass music at all, and but the banjo was there. It was the same amount of money. I was surrounded by other musicians at the time who played everything but the banjo, and so I walked in and I said to them, like, I have $200 if I can walk out of here with that for literally $200,
right.
I'll take it.
Yeah, cut me some tax off or whatever.
Yeah, and so they're like, yeah, we can do that. And I walked out, and I remember very vividly walking home that day and pulling it out of the case and looking at it on the couch, and just thinking, like, this is it. Like, this is my thing. Like, I don't have a thing right now, and this is going to become my thing.
Wow.
And because I lived at that place, that was very, like, I was doing my job just by being there, like making sure that people weren't sleeping on the front porch and making sure that people weren't doing terrible things in the backyard. Right. Just being present was doing your job at that place. And so...
Which seems simple in a way, but it's also a pretty big burden when your home is that intertwined with your... You always have to be on, right? There
are people I know that live in those kinds of places for their entire lives, and I can't be one of those people. I did it for 3 years, and it was almost too long. And yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, it was, but because of that, like, I could sit on the front porch with my banjo and practice and be doing my job,
Yeah.
And so I started older than I wish I had. But at the same time, those early years, I was able to practice and a lot. And it was the house was a magnet for kind of ultra left and musical people. Those things often go hand in hand. There was a bookshelf full of Rise Up Singing, that book, Rise Up Singing, that has a bunch of great...
all the songs,
And we would, once a week, there'd be not a jam session, it'd be like a singing session where everybody in the house and in the neighborhood would come and we'd play music. And I had there was a band, like day 3 of buying my banjo, I learned G, C, and D.
Okay.
And there was a band that was practicing in the basement of the house called the Low Rent Collective Ensemble, and I just grabbed my banjo and said, I want to play with y'all.
Yeah.
And I remember we played 2 songs in G, and then they were like, all right, this next one's an E, and I was like, I'm out. But I mean, I was playing with other people from the get-go.
Yeah.
And that is so huge.
I really agree, but if you had to try to explain it, what do you think that offers somebody who's just learning as opposed to just hitting the books or the YouTube?
That's a good question. That's something I tell my students right off the bat, and very few listen to me, and I get it because it's so intimidating to play with other people when you have no idea what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But I think so much of music in general involves interpersonal relationships, whether you like it or not. Uh-huh. And so if you start thinking about that and developing those skills of connecting with people with your instrument, you're going to get good at that at the same rate that you get good at playing the instrument. And I've seen firsthand people who can sit at their house and play really well on their instrument, and the minute they get into even a jam session, let alone a performance session,
right,
they're missing some of those skills. And, and so it is definitely good to start developing those as soon as possible.
Yeah, totally. So how were you learning, and what kind of music were you checking out? Because you have a pretty solidly legit traditional sounding style at this point. You must have picked up on a lot of this stuff. You weren't just completely winging it, were you?
No. So I remember a week after I got the banjo, because this was not pre-internet, but pre-YouTube,
Sure.
And so I sat down and I could figure out what G, C, and D, I think the guitar player in that band showed me. And I was, without finger picks, doing some kind of 4-string, like that roll without picks, and following the chord changes if it was in G. But I realized really quickly I needed a teacher. Mm-hmm. And so I went back to the Old Town School. And this is a great story, actually, because I got lessons from this guy named Gus Friedlander, who is kind of a legend in the Chicago bluegrass scene. He's an eccentric guy. I mean, he's a staunch traditionalist.
Okay.
And he sat me down and was like, here's what you're going to do. And I remember he had me get picks, and I got the Pete Wernick book.
Sure.
But he was like, that's good. You can use that on your own time. He had reams of tab that he had collected over his many years of teaching. And I remember the first tab he gave me was a Home Sweet Home in G. And it was an open, I could still play this. Because it was the first song I learned by memory. He just started, and every week he would bring me a cassette tape that he had taped over the little holes on the top of the cassette tape. And he'd go to like a thrift store, buy a bunch of cassettes that nobody wanted because it was 2000, the year 2000. And it was before they had come back as a hipster thing. And he recorded Bill Monroe. The first album he gave me was a Hot Rise album that had High on a Mountaintop on it, so whatever album that was. Then Bill Monroe, then Newgrass Revival, like he really...
Just making you mixtapes of all the stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I would go home and I would listen to it dutifully. That was my way weekly. It was a bi-weekly thing. I took the lessons bi-weekly. And the story about the lessons that's interesting is, I mean, he was a funny guy that I really hold dearly in my heart. But he could be difficult to deal with. Mm-hmm. And he knew I was really poor. I was living at that place. I wasn't making any money. And he figured out the school wouldn't let you do lessons every other week. It was 8 weeks in a row.
Okay.
And so he made me and some other kid that was look like one person on the books. And after about a year, he got caught doing that, and they fired him for it.
Oh, my.
Yeah. Now, I love the Old Town School. There very well could have been a lot more going on behind that. So, so I'm not. Who knows?
But at least from your perspective, it seemed a little.
It was unfortunate.
Yeah.
It was, so I followed him up to Guitar Works in Evanston to take lessons with him there, and continued working with him until the day he said, "You don't need me anymore." Which,
and how long did that take?
I don't remember exactly. Probably 3 or 4 years, maybe less than that. But but that's something I'll always respect. Because he
was willing to lose a student just out of honesty and
exactly. So he said you should try to get in touch with Greg Cahill, and I did. And Greg and I had like 3 private lessons, and then we became friends. And I kind of stopped doing the lessons with him. But at that point, I was playing regularly with a bluegrass band and learning on my own. So
kind of finding your own way at that point.
Yeah, trying to.
So what kind of stuff was appealing to you? You said he gave you all these mixtapes. Did any of that jump out at you as being some of your early favorite influential type of stuff?
Sure. I loved Hot Rise. I loved, Flat and Scruggs.
Sure.
It's funny on a podcast like this, I've got to imagine everybody says some of that
I think so.
stuff.
I should probably implement some sort of
scoreboard.
Okay, we all know Flat and Scruggs.
Right.
Just we'll assume that.
Yeah.
Talk about everything.
Yeah. Gus did. My teacher did. He gave me Foggy Mountain Banjo. And that was revelatory.
Sure.
I remember sitting in the garage at that place and working on Earl's Breakdown for hours and hours at a time.
Yeah.
It's I think that's a common experience. Like it still is the thing that happens to all of us.
Repetition is the key.
Yeah,
for sure. This is maybe slightly off topic, but you and Greg kind of have a common social worker attitude, don't you?
Yeah.
Is that something that you bonded with?
Absolutely.
Right away?
We've talked about writing a book together, less than casually. Like, we've talked about it several times. Like, he started his band in the late 70s, right around when I was born. And they've been together they're coming up on their 45th anniversary.
Yeah.
But
every time you blink, it's like another 5
I know,
years
it's
goes
true,
by.
It's true. And
Special Consensus has their 50th reunion.
Yeah, and those reunions are, it's comical because it's hard to get through. He has to do it 2 nights now because he has every version of the band come up. And I went to the last one, and it was like 4 hours long.
Right.
But yeah, we have very similar backgrounds. You're right. He was a social worker and eventually got to the point where he had to choose between being a social worker and a banjo player, and that's exactly what happened to me. After I left that house, I got a job at a shelter, and after that, I got a job as a outreach worker for an agency in Chicago, and I literally got to the point where I was playing till 3 a.m. on a Tuesday night, and then getting into work at 8 a.m. And my boss
so many times you can do that.
Yeah. My boss was like, I got written up for it once. And
just for being kind of out of it?
Yeah, showing up. And I think I was late for the 4th time in 3 weeks or something. And I loved that job. And the thought of getting to the point where I got let go of it was like a wake up call for me. And I definitely remember sitting down and I was like, I think if I quit this job, I'm going to be really poor, but I can ratchet up the lessons, I can do more gigs, and hopefully make it happen.
And that's what you did?
And that's what I did.
Cool. The Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, Deering Banjos, who want you to know that banjo teachers love good times. In a recent survey conducted by Deering, over 200 banjo teachers were asked, how likely is it that you would recommend the good time banjo to your students? An overwhelming 85% responded that they would, with the number one reason being that good times are easy to play. Even Good Time Ambassador and 2019 IBMA Banjo Player of the Year Kristen Scott Benson agrees that you will not find a better banjo than this in the price range of the Deering Good Time. With the good time banjos, Deering understands the importance of starting out with a banjo that will help, not hinder, your banjo learning experience, which is why they make sure that each and every good time banjo leaves looking great, feeling great, and sounding great. For more information and to see exclusive videos from Good Time ambassadors Kristen Scott Benson and Pete Wernick, head over to deeringbanjos.com/teacherslovegoodtimes. When did you start to hear, this is kind of a funny question to think about yourself, I guess, but I'll ask it anyway. When did you start to hear like your own style emerging, and how would you, what helped you get there, and what do you think are the main principles that you try to play with?
You know, when we were just starting to play in Chicago, there wasn't a ton of bluegrass going on. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't...
Was it basically Greg and that's it?
It was, and he wasn't... You know, Greg lives in Oak Lawn, mm-hmm. and Special C doesn't play in Chicago that often. Mm-hmm. I didn't really see the band live that much until more the past 7 years or so, because they were just on the road constantly, and don't play in the city that much. So... And I was playing with a bunch of guys who, like myself and James, our dobro player, were probably the guys who were serious about playing correctly. And so we were playing with a guitar player who didn't really play the standard bluegrass rhythm. And for me, once we had a guitar player that could play that rhythm, it was like, oh my God, for me. Because to me, I feel like the banjo roll locks in with that bluegrass rhythm guitar in a way. And so like in my in-ear mix, I have the guitar up as loud or louder than anything.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that more then. That's really interesting. Are you able to explain like what you listen for, or how you, maybe even how you play differently with different guitar players, or how that affects you? The
closer they are to playing that, I'm not a guitar player, so it's hard for me to describe, but you know, that thing where their wrist bounces and the
boom strum.
Yeah, yeah.
Thing.
And the closer they are to playing like Tony did, you know, like to me, that's the most exciting thing to lock in with. And, you know, I am not, I didn't get on the Bela Fleck train. I didn't get on I'm a hard driving Scruggs style player, and that's all I am. And it's taken a while to get okay with that, and I'm more okay with it now than I've ever been. But that's what excites me about playing bluegrass, is playing the medium and up-tempo tunes locked in with a guitar player who's playing rock-solid rhythm. For some reason, there's something about I remember the first time we had a guy, Ben Benedict, join our band who could do that rhythm, and I just remember that first day he got on stage with us, and I was just like, yes, this is what I've been waiting for.
That's great. Yeah. He lives around here now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He moved up this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just said something like it took you a while to be okay with accepting your identity as a hard driving bluegrass player.
Yeah.
What does that mean? You were seeing other people do really fancy Bela, Noam Pikelny stuff.
Yeah. Which I have a utmost respect for, but it's not my thing. I think I started later, and I've done other things have happened over the years that the instrument continues to mean a whole lot to me, but I'm just not, that stuff isn't something I want to do all that much. Like I really still hold on to those early years of obsessing over Scruggs style and the drive. The drive is what gets me. Like my banjo is punchy, and I like it that way.
Yeah.
I mean that's what appeals to me. I'm less of a Stanley guy and more of a Scruggs guy. Stanley takes it a little bit too far in that direction for me sometimes. But and so it's taken me a while to get used to. You know, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before we started here. There's these young kids that just play circles.
Lights out.
Oh, yeah. It's unbelievable. But I'm 42 now, and I've gotten over my ego with that stuff to a certain degree, and I like to drive. That's my thing, and
there will always be a place for that. I don't think you have to worry about completely getting outsourced as far as that goes.
I've eliminated that possibility because it's my band. And
that's another good way to look at it.
So
you can't fire me.
That's right.
Do you have a way that you work on that? If your priority is getting that solid drive, what is your practice routine like?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely spend a fair amount of time with a metronome and going back to the fundamentals a lot for me. Greg instilled that in me quite a bit. He still does that stuff when he has the time.
Right.
And
like specifically, what does that look like? What are you doing with the metronome?
I flip the beat sometimes. Like,
how do you mean?
Like play on the 1 and the 3 with it on the 1, the 3, and then with the 2 on the 2 and the 4.
I see.
And just
so pretend the metronome's the bass, and then pretend it's the mandolin.
Exactly, right. And that's something I work on. I was telling you about how the guitar is the one I like to lock in with, and sometimes I need to get away from that some and let John, our bass player, be the pulse more. And that's something I've started to realize over the years, that I need to let him do that more. So that we're all following him instead of me following the guitar player and the guitar player following John. And
right. Hopefully that's how it's working.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, metronome. I don't. If we're working on new tunes, I spend a fair amount of time with that and with the metronome along with it. We're actually going into the process of making an album right now.
Oh,
that stuff's
how great.
About to become reality for me very soon.
Yeah.
We tour so much that my own personal practice time sometimes takes a hit. And it's not just the touring, it's also the management of the band that gets in the way with that. And there are definitely people who would say that that's not an excuse, but it's definitely something that I wish I need to manufacture more time for practice for sure. But there's a lot competing for it.
Have enough of that coffee, and we can at least eliminate like the sleeping hours from your day.
That's right.
And that frees up at least 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, right.
Something like that.
Right.
Do you have any other tips for people who are looking to play that driving style? I imagine it seems to me, if I'm trying to like remember when I was learning, the hardest thing to like wrap your brain around is maybe how to figure out the melody of a song, but then how do you like combine that with all this other stuff to play your Scruggs version of it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is there any, I don't know, is there any advice you have?
That's interesting. I mean, it's funny, over the years, simply through playing a lot and jamming, I've definitely gotten to the point where it's easier for me to find a melody in the Scruggs style. But it is an elusive thing that comes with time. And, I was just where we have a guy who just played his first show with us last night, Jake Howard, we were trying to find a tune we could do to feature him. And he was playing us a fiddle tune. It was called Booth Shot Lincoln. And which I'd never heard before. Not a hard one, but they were playing. I grabbed my banjo and
everyone knew it but you.
Yeah, no, they were. Everybody was picking up on it. But I stood back, 6 feet from the jam and took my time to make sure I knew where all those corner points were, and then. Did the same thing I was doing 15 years ago, which was apply a pretty standard forward roll to those corner points of the melody. And that's definitely my style. I definitely am a pretty straight melody player.
Right.
And so that's what I did. I wish I could remember it now. We played it through like twice and then moved on to the next one. But, that book, Splitting the Licks, was pretty revelatory for me.
Huh, okay.
Or revelatory, yeah. And that's what that book talks about. It's like you find the melody before you find anything else, and you add the rolls to that. And you can use licks for embellishment, but this is how to stick to the melody.
Yeah. That will always be an okay thing to do.
Yeah.
Like,
I hope so.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like you can jump off the ledge and do some crazy melodic stuff, and maybe that'll work. But like, there's never a time that just playing the good solid melody
right.
won't work.
Yeah.
Anyone who knows me personally or listens to the podcast a bit knows that I'm a sucker for like world music, and especially world music combined with banjo. I just love that stuff. So I'm like endlessly fascinated just seeing your exploits. Explain, if people aren't familiar with your band and what you guys are up to, explain like the places you've been and how you've gotten yourself in these pretty outrageous situations, taking international travel or international touring to like a whole new art form, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's to this day never ceases to amaze me either, though we've definitely shifted to making that kind of stuff a priority. But about 6 years ago, we applied for American Music Abroad, which is the kind of great-grandchild of the Jazz Ambassadors program from the 1950s, which was this kind of musical diplomacy program that the State Department put on kind of to fight Russian influence during the Cold War. But the State Department realized after the Cold War that work was more effective in bringing people together than anything the State Department did. And so those programs continue to exist today, just by a different name. And so we applied, and it started off as jazz music because that was a pretty foundational part of American music.
During wartime especially, yeah.
Absolutely. And now it's opened up to all sorts of genres.
Yeah.
And so we applied 6 years ago. It's not a simple application process. It involves like, you have to demonstrate that you can teach. You have to demonstrate some worldview even. Like, they want to have, it's not easy work, and they want to make sure that the people they're bringing are passionate about it.
Yeah, when I was in Lindsay Lou and the Flatbellies, we applied for that as well and did not get accepted, but I do remember the application process being like, I think there were even maybe a couple essays that you have to write. You have to have demonstrated abilities in a few of these areas.
It was strange that I had never had to put that stuff down on paper. But we got it. I remember that first audition. Star Moss was in the band at the time, one of the sweetest guys ever, and doesn't talk a whole lot. But I remember at the end of the audition, because you're sitting there and you're auditioning, and there's like 5 people from the State Department sitting with clipboards and looking very judgmental.
Yeah, of course.
And they've seen 100 bands today, and they just want to get out of there.
Like a parallel universe version of like America's Got Talent or something.
Totally, yeah. And I remember at the end, they were like, okay, thank you, next. And we were walking out, and Star, completely out of character, stopped and turned around. He said, can I say one more thing? And they were like, yeah, sure. And he said, I just want you all to know that we want this so bad. And if you give us this opportunity, we will run with it. And like, just thinking about it still makes me tear up. Like that is not in his personality. But
what were you thinking when he stopped?
Yeah.
What did you think was coming?
I didn't know. Like,
were you worried?
No, because he was too much of a sweetheart. It just was so out of character for him. And in my head, I feel like that played a big role.
Oh, how cool.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
And so that first trip, they sent us to West Africa. And we didn't know this at the time, but that was going to be the most difficult of any of the tours we've ever done.
Not just because it was your first one?
No, not at all. It was because they sent us to some countries that were difficult to go to. Liberia, Niger, Mauritania, some countries at the bottom of the GDP scale.
So you mean difficult in terms of just like the experiences being a difficult reality to confront, or difficult in terms of like physical access or safety?
Both. Well, I mean, safety, I've never felt unsafe on these.
Okay.
We flew into Nigeria the day of a bombing, and our mothers were just beside themselves. But I've never felt unsafe. They can't afford for us to put us in a situation where we're not going to be safe.
Yeah.
But, Niger is arguably the poorest country in the world, and bearing witness to that stuff is profound, to say the least.
Right.
And Mauritania too, even though they're incredibly beautiful places, it was again paradigm shift in a whole totally different way. When I went with my dad to Africa when I was a kid, I was under the tutelage of my father, who knows the country like the back of his hand, and whereas we, in Niger, we drove from Niamey, the capital, to Zinder. And Zinder is the part nobody goes to Zinder, and it's one of those stops on the journey from the middle of Africa to try to get to Europe, and it's just one of the most destitute places on the planet where these people get taken advantage of because they want to get out of there.
Oh, I see.
And it's it's just a lot to see and take in, and it's important. It's something I feel so important to see, and I feel so lucky to have seen it. But you come back from a trip like that, and it's just you're exhausted in a way that is hard to put into words.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, and there's so many.
We could fill 10 podcasts with your tales.
I had in Niger. It is a very beautiful country, and the musical heritage there is incredible. And we played a show in Niamey, the capital, and they always pair us up with local bands. And Liberia is an English-speaking country. Congo has a lot of people that speak English. Those were on that trip. Niger is a francophone country, so I don't speak any French. And they plunked us down with this band 2 hours before a performance, and they're like, "All right, figure out how to play music together. We'll see you guys in a bit."
Was that the premise, that these bands they would pair you with, you're actually supposed to collaborate? It's not just like a co-bill or something.
No, it's like figure out how to make music together, and
which is super cool.
Oh,
but yeah,
and that was like the first. It wasn't the first time that it happened, but it was like maybe the second or third. And this band, nobody spoke English, and so
no one spoke French of you guys,
right?
Okay.
And so but you don't need it, Like as cliche as it is, it's just like all of a sudden there's a couple minutes of awkwardness, and then someone's like motions to their instrument, and they start playing a song, and I can read guitar chords off someone's hands. And you figure it out. All of a sudden, you've got one song, and then we teach them one of ours, and like one with a short chorus. So even if they don't speak English, they can mimic the sounds of the words.
Right.
And then you go on stage, and like everybody's that part of the world. Everybody dancing is a huge part. You got to be willing to move a little bit and dance a little bit, and the audience loves it when they see guys like us trying to emulate their style of dancing over there. But the coolest thing about that band was that there was a guy in that band who was playing the accounting, and I knew what that instrument was. He didn't know what my instrument was.
Oh, how crazy!
Yeah, and so
you're basically like Bill and Ted going. Like Bill and Ted Wild Stallions from the future visiting their former selves with their electric guitars.
Right.
That is insane.
And I gravitated to him, of course, and he was shy. He was kind of a shy guy. But I was just like, play the strings. Play him. And it was a 3-string counting, and it had a string halfway up the neck.
Yeah.
And he played them, and I was like, checked out my strings, and I was like, wow, that's tuned in F or F. Yeah, F sharp. And all 3 strings were tuned to an open tuning. So I tuned my banjo down a half step, and we played together. And effortlessly, and he was playing, he had this kind of stick that I remember stuck out, kind of held it with his fist and played it like that. But he was still playing kind of a roll with it. It was just one stick doing the roll instead of 3 fingers. And
interesting.
And we had that moment backstage, just the two of us, and like no one was there to be like, this is historic, or and
it's just something that happened and it's gone to the air. Yeah,
like it was just.
Oh, I'm such a combination of like envious and jealous, but like so proud of you guys and like fascinated to hear about it. Like that's just perfect. I love it. Love everything about it.
Thanks. I mean, it is the greatest gift I've ever been given to have those experiences, and that's why we shifted. Like that stuff kept happening because we loved it so much, and we started developing relationships with people in the State Department, and we started getting calls. We didn't apply for the program anymore. It was like, hey, I was the cultural affairs officer in Mauritania when you were there. I'm in Kyrgyzstan now. What do you guys think? Can you come?
You've planted enough seeds that they're getting sown throughout.
And we just had the most gratifying experience. We got asked to play for the Smithsonian Festival of the Lights in D.C. Part of it was connected to the State Department, the Bureau of Cultural Affairs. And so while we were out there, they had us stay an extra day, and we went to the office at the State Department, the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs, and met the people in the building that book our tours and
how cool.
Do the DC side of it. And we walked in, and like people knew who we were.
Whoa,
which was just like, the Henhouse Prowlers. You guys do this stuff all the time. Like, you guys we're sending you out and you're coming back.
You were kind of big shots.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we were big shots, but they love that we started Bluegrass Ambassadors, our nonprofit. And they were just like, they had a million questions about it. But to me, I had this brief moment in that office, and I was so surprised that office was a bunch of cubicles. And I'm on the phone with these people, and I'm seeing I'm on the phone with the State Department. I feel like they're in thrones or something, and no, they were in cubicles doing this great work.
Yeah.
And I walked around the office, and there were pictures on the wall of Louis Armstrong in Egypt,
back from the jazz ambassadors,
those guys. We're a bluegrass band from Chicago that does this work a lot, and it's great, and we do it well, and I'm proud of us, and I take it really seriously. That's Louis Armstrong, and I mean some of those, and Dave Brubeck, and oh my God,
just the heaviest hitters of them all,
doing the kind of work that we've had the privilege of being able to do. There was just this moment in there where I was trying not to choke up because I knew I had to go into a meeting with these people,
So incredible.
Yeah.
Do you learn any music while you're over there? I can't even get my words out. It's just so cool.
Yeah, that's why the other thing was we have learned a bunch of songs. Before we go, we get people on the ground in those countries to help us figure out what songs are popular. And really, we only have the time to learn one song because we don't just learn to play it, we learn to sing it in their language.
So are you learning basically like their version of like Oh Susanna or something like that? Like a tune that everyone knows?
No, it's more, although that did just happen in Uzbekistan, I think, because that was a traditional folk tune that we learned. And everybody knew it because it was one of the country's favorite songs that had been modernized recently. So we had a modern version to learn it off of. But we found one of the original versions. But like in Africa, you're going to learn, my understanding is that there are so many cultures packed into one country over there that you're not going to learn, there's no one folk song that everybody knows, or it's less likely, you got to learn pop songs.
Well, that's part of like and this is such a bigger issue, but that's part of the big deal in Africa, right? That the political lines aren't necessarily drawn around the cultural lines.
Yeah, like Europeans came in and drew those lines.
Right.
So So yeah, like the first song we ever learned is now the song that we get requested more than anything here in the States.
And what is it? I want to hear some of this stuff.
It's called Chop My Money, and it's a Nigerian pop tune. It's not as, I can play you another one that's from Uganda that actually.
Yeah, I just want to hear something otherworldly that you've picked up.
This is I've played this solo once before. This is from Uganda. It's by a guy named Eddie Kenzo, we've been to Uganda twice. And the first time we went, he was a rising star. And so he came out and performed on television with us. And it was crazy. It was like millions of people watching like the hippest show on TV there. And
you guys.
Yeah, exactly. These white guys in suits. And they told us, like, we hear Eddie's coming to the station. He's supposedly on his way. We're going to go live in 10 minutes. Hopefully he gets here. Sure enough, 6 minutes later, he walks in the door and he's like, hey, guys. He's like, I heard you learned my song. We were like, yeah. And he goes, let me hear it. And we played a couple bars of it. And he goes, okay, we're going live. And we became his backup band on television in front of millions of people.
Oh, man.
On this song, which is called Sityalos. And it's a really beautiful song about, Eddie Kenzo came from a tiny village. He was incredibly poor. And he got over not having what he needed to get on with his life and grow. And that's kind of, Sityalos means don't fear loss. And it's a beautiful song that has a lot of different, actually has 12 different languages in it, but the primary language is Luganda, which is the main language of Ugandan people, even though the official language is English because it was a British colony.
Okay, but it's a tribal language?
Or it's I'm not going to act like I know the right words of what to call the language, but it's something everybody there speaks.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a native language to that country. So I'll try to play a little bit over here. So. 3 chords. Abange, Bunubalama Boompi, Zekagange, Kalimana Kenange, Wenja Chikala Muje Vude, Menduos take a bana fe, Achole Kawadada, Nebagen de Kakanga, Itali Musana, oh mama, oh la la, oh Galeba, Gatito Bakana Chongamba, Jango Muziki Tukasam, Rambeto Bakana Chongamba, Jangwe to Trichanga,
I love it.
But I mean, it's 3 chords.
I love it.
There's nothing.
Yeah.
But, that's the reason it takes us time is because we learn the words, and that's what connects us when we go to these places. And I can't tell you how many times we've done that. You get on stage, you play that song towards the end of your set, and people rush up and start talking to you in their language. And they assume that you learned to speak it.
You're
and it's
bilingual
like, no,
or something.
no, not at all. So,
but that's also, it's flattering even that you could fool them for a few minutes.
It's hugely flattering, and we take it seriously. Like I spend many hours pacing in my apartment, learning how to pronounce words to different languages as closely as I can. And we just had this amazing experience in Uzbekistan a few months ago, where we've started to record a video of ourselves before we go playing and singing the song, and we send it ahead, and for them to use on social media. And in Uzbekistan, Facebook is not as popular as there's a platform called Telegram that's huge in Russia and Central Asia, and the State Department posted the video of us playing this song Kilpalama and on Facebook, and someone downloaded it off Facebook, put it on Telegram, and like 6 million people watched the video. And so by the time we got to the country, we were celebrities. And I went 5 days early. I'm to the point now where I want to go and have some time to explore. Yeah. And Uzbekistan is a completely and utterly safe place to do that. And my second day, I went to get this dish plov, which is the traditional Uzbek food. If you're in Uzbekistan, you eat plov.
Okay.
It's rice and lamb and horse meat and eggs.
What did we think about that?
I didn't like the horse meat, but I loved the plov.
Okay.
I mean, it was delicious. I stayed away from the horse meat. Just,
All right.
It's a mental thing.
Right.
But I was sitting at this restaurant eating plov, and I realized the person sitting behind me was watching that video on their phone.
No way.
Yeah, that was the first
What a trip.
indication. I was like, oh my God. Like, I recognized, I could hear my banjo.
Košinos madakina kupilama Belinkas madakina kupilama Benzenigan perdesam kupilama Tode kele akingis dakina kupilama Kupilama jongina kupilama Kupilama jongina kupilama
Volimo čisto čirkalpalama Kelsen darvozamo čirkalpalama Janta sadık boyunga kalpalama Dode kupya maçindano şirkalpalama
Kupilama jongina kupilama Kupilama jongina kupilama
You know, like, of course, because that's what pierces above everything. You know? Like,
You're like, have I finally lost it and gone insane?
Yeah, right.
Am I really?
so, you know, that's the power of that kind of diplomacy, that kind of exchange. It's like,
Yeah.
and if you show up and you've learned their music, they're so much more receptive to hearing and understanding your music, you know? And like, that's one of the most rewarding things about it is it becomes a real exchange instead of just showing up and playing bluegrass as kind of
It's incredible. Yeah, there's so much good music out there that, why would you not try to soak it in
Right.
if you have such an invaluable opportunity like
Yeah.
that? So crazy. Folks, I got to hop in here still from the windy backyard studio to talk to you a little bit about the newest podcast sponsor, Elderly Instruments. Elderly Instruments in Lansing, Michigan. They've been family owned since 1972, but have built themselves into the world's most trusted source for new, used, and vintage stringed instruments. A lot of you know that I used to work there, so I've seen the behind the scenes stuff. I know how the sausage is made, and I can honestly tell you it's still the first place that I go for any of my banjo needs, whether it's an instrument or any of the usual or unusual accessories that go with banjos or really any other stringed instrument. Although if it's another instrument besides the banjo, is it really considered a need? All of your guitar, ukulele, mandolin wants and banjo needs can be found at Elderly Instruments. They have an incredible selection. My favorite part about working there was that none of the salespeople were on commission. Their only job is to help the customers find the right instrument for them or the right other piece of equipment that will help them in their musical career, musical journey, musical education. They're there to help, they're friendly, they're down to earth, and they know what they're talking about. It's where I go, and it's where you should go too. Elderly.com is how you check that out. Or if you happen to be in the Lansing, Michigan area, their showroom is back open, and it's absolutely worth checking out. People come there from all over the world, and it's definitely worth it. Once again, that's elderly.com. Check it out. We should probably talk about your banjo.
Yes.
We have not even mentioned that. What are you rocking in terms of the instrument and all the extras?
I actually have two that I switch between.
Okay.
This one is a Huber Sammy Sheeler model that I was actually gifted by a student of mine who was fairly well off, but I was teaching him when he had cancer, and he recovered and gave me this banjo. Like, I seemed to have this kind of
Like a lease on life kind of thing?
Exactly.
Okay.
And you know what? I'd always been a one banjo man. Like my other banjo is a Deering Terry Bauckham model.
Okay.
So, I mean, this relates back to what we were talking about. Sammy and Terry drive, man. Neither of them, like I know Sammy specifically doesn't really believe in chopping during a mandolin solo. At least I've heard that. And I feel the same way. It's like you lose that role in a song and it changes the feel of the song immediately.
Right. So he just steps away from the mic and keeps cranking away,
right.
Usually.
Yeah.
Seems
it's the dynamics that are the key there.
Yeah, right.
I can hear my band rolling their eyes if they're listening to this. Like, yes, play quieter. But yeah, so I do, as much as I like the old style playing. I have a pickup on this, and I use a Tone Dexter.
And what's the pickup?
The pickup is a Shatton. It used to have what was it called? OM2 with a microphone and a pickup that you blend together in a pack.
Okay.
But then I realized that the Tone Dexter pedals are kind of a game changer, and you don't need. And that's that takes. So I just use this pickup as it works with the Tone Dexter. And the Tone Dexter is one of those microphone imaging.
Yeah,
pedals.
I'm familiar, but in case people aren't, why don't you tell them what's so cool about that?
With my limited mechanical understanding of it, it is this way of like the Tone Dexter pedal has an XLR in on it, and you plug a microphone into it, and you record. You actually hit this button on it, and it listens to your banjo through the microphone, takes these frequencies that the pickup doesn't transmit, and puts them back into the pickup. And it's pretty amazing. Like, even my guitar player who acts like he hates the banjo all the time because it's so funny, he acknowledges, he's like, whoa. Like you can A/B it. Here's without the effect. Here's with it. It becomes much closer to an acoustic sound.
Yeah,
it's not the second coming of Earl. It's still not perfect. But we use in-ears, and I'm hearing this terrible tone from my pickup in my in-ears right inside my head. It was just it was driving me crazy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So the Tone Dexter has just been a big deal for me.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Good.
And my other banjo is a Deering Terry Bauckham model, which is also, it just cracks.
Yeah.
And I love that.
I mean, this one sounds incredible. So
yeah, this is a good banjo. And it's not even, man, this thing sounded twice as good when I first got it. I just, I beat the heck out of these things. I really do. And there really isn't a good setup person in Chicago.
That's surprising.
Yeah, like I know I've been told there's a couple of guys out in the suburbs, but it's hard for me to drop my instrument off anywhere because we're gone all the time. So it's like it's a difficult thing. So
right. Well, at least you have two now. It makes it
it's
probably
true. It makes it a little easier
to leapfrog them.
But you know how it is. It's like you get used to one, and then switching back. Like
are they pretty different to get used to?
Yeah, the Deering is a walnut.
Right.
And this is mahogany, and the neck on this one is a lot thinner than the Deering, and it's startling to switch back. But
does it take a few days or something?
It really does.
Yeah.
It really does. And I miss being able to. I miss the Deering, but switching back to it sometimes is a pain in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
So,
how about everything else? Are you partial to any particular picks or strings or heads or anything like
National, I mean, nothing revelatory again.
Okay.
National, the old style finger picks. I actually have a pair that are, I don't have them with me here, but they're the old school ones that somebody just gave me years ago before they started costing $100. So I play those at home because I lose everything. And I use a Zuki.
It's good to be self-aware about that kind of thing.
I'm the worst. I've left my banjo. I almost left my laptop at breakfast this morning, and I left my banjo in Bloomington, Illinois once and didn't realize it till the next day.
And where had you gone?
Chicago, home to Chicago. Okay. So it was like a 3-hour drive.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I remember the owner of the club called me. He goes, yeah, your banjo's here. And I was like, oh my God. Like I realized that when he told me, and he goes, what is wrong with you?
I don't know.
I know. So I use a Zuki thumb pick, which I've been laughed at for, but they adjust bad attack angle some.
Right. They have like that weird angled blade
Yeah,
to
exactly.
it. Yeah.
So
yeah, look it up. It's a little crazy. But
I've gotten to the point where I really like it. I used to use one of those orange picks with just the little tiny piece of plastic.
like
off.
it's giving you the finger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
is that a Fred Kelly?
maybe I don't
okay.
know, but these seem to adjust my right hand without me having to adjust my right hand.
Yeah, it angles for you.
Right, exactly.
They even have different degrees of angle options.
Yeah, they do. I use kind of a medium one. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
I got to get you to the gig, but I don't want to let you go before you tell us like websites, information of like how to find you in the band and the ambassadors.
Yeah, so henhouseprowlers.com and then bluegrassambassadors.org is our nonprofit. And I know it's a bummer we're running out of time, but that's okay. While we travel all over the world to do that stuff, what Bluegrass Ambassadors is we've been developing these educational programs back here in the States where we go into schools that don't have robust music programs and are able to not only bring them education about American folk music and folk music traditions, but then we can teach them about music from all over the world and kind of, start with our folk music and then talk about other countries and their folk music and hopefully normalize being curious about the world.
Yeah, how incredible. That's great. So, I definitely didn't have... I'm sure I was exposed to plenty of stuff, but definitely not that exactly. So the more you can get that stuff out there,
yeah, we're working on it.
It'll help. Hey, thanks a lot, Ben. We're going to do this again because I feel like I have so much more to ask you about.
Good.
But yeah, we'll get the show on the road, and thanks a lot for your time.
Man. Absolutely.
And that's going to do it for the episode featuring Ben Wright of the Henhouse Prowlers. Thank you so much for listening. There were some sound clips in that episode in order of appearance. It was Spoiler Alert, performed by the Henhouse Prowlers, Booth Shot Lincoln, performed by Ethan Satiowan. Ethan, I really hope I pronounced your name right. I think I did. Kaira, performed by Musa Giabate, playing the ngoni, which is a similar instrument to the akanting that Ben was describing there. And then finally, Kupilama by the Henhouse Prowlers, featuring guest Don Sternberg playing mandolin on that. Thank you once again to the Patreon supporters of today's episode. That's Austin Cole and Renee McIntosh. Thank you so much to both of you. Everyone else, go to patreon.com/banjopodcast. Learn how you can support the show. I really appreciate all of that. Really glad to have you all with me for this, and hope you join me next time. Hopefully the next thing will be one of those new music updates. I hope I can get that ready, and we'll see what happens with that. But either way, I'll see you all soon. Everyone take care. Enjoy the beginning of your summer.